The evening was unusually quiet in New York City. A soft drizzle pattered against the windows of the sleek penthouse suite where Taylor Swift had been rehearsing for her upcoming world tour. The soft glow of the city lights seeped through the curtains, casting a warm, golden hue over the room. A few scattered song lyrics lay across the coffee table, but her mind wasn't on the music that night. She felt a strange restlessness in the air, a tension she couldn't place. It wasn't supposed to be like this. She had just finished her interview with a major media outlet, and the excitement of the moment should have been buzzing through her veins, but something gnawed at her. She'd caught a glimpse of a message on her phone before the interview, a strange number with a cryptic text. "We need you. Tonight. The mission is vital. Trust no one." The words echoed in her head, but she dismissed them at first. A prank, maybe? But why did it feel so real? Her phone buzzed again, this time with a secure message. She hesitated before opening it. The words sent a chill down her spine. "The FBI has identified you as a key asset in an undercover mission. You are now working for us. Instructions will follow." Her heart skipped a beat. Working for the FBI? A quick laugh bubbled up in her throat, but it quickly faded when the phone rang, showing an unknown number. Taking a breath, Taylor answered. "Miss Swift, we're aware of the situation you've just been made aware of. We need you. You've been selected for a mission, and there's no turning back now." The voice was calm, but the gravity of it all pressed in on her. "What do you mean, no turning back? I'm a pop star, not a secret agent." There was a brief silence on the other end, as if the person on the line was considering how best to respond. "You've already been compromised. We've been tracking a dangerous group, and your involvement with them will provide the cover we need. You can't say no." Taylor felt her head spin. "I can't. This is insane." "I know, but you're already in deeper than you realize." The voice paused, then added, "We'll send someone to meet you." Before she could protest, the line went dead. The room suddenly felt much smaller. Her mind raced. Could this really be happening? Was she just being swept into something much bigger than herself? Before she could process more, there was a knock at the door. Her pulse quickened as she moved toward the door, her feet heavy. When she opened it, standing in the dim hallway was a woman in a sharply tailored suit, holding a folder with an official seal. "I'm Agent Davis." The woman introduced herself coolly, slipping past Taylor into the apartment with a practiced ease. She didn't seem fazed by the pop star's obvious confusion or by the glittering piles of awards and memorabilia scattered around the room. "We've been watching you, Miss Swift. This will be your new reality." The suddenness of it all made Taylor's heart race. She blinked, her mind still reeling. What kind of trouble had she just walked into? Agent Davis flipped open the folder and handed Taylor a photograph of a man she didn't recognize. "This is your first assignment. We'll brief you in full detail shortly." "Wait, what?" Taylor stuttered, eyes still fixed on the picture. Was this a joke? But the agent's expression didn't change. It was all business now. "This is bigger than you. I suggest you get on board quickly, because you're already in." As the weight of the situation began to sink in, the quiet buzz of city life outside seemed suddenly distant, as if the world had just slipped into a strange, uncharted reality. Taylor took a deep breath, her mind still processing everything. Was she really about to become an FBI spy? Was this even real? The adventure, it seemed, had already begun. As Agent Davis handed her the photograph, Taylor felt her pulse quicken, her thoughts tangled in a dizzying web of confusion. The photo was of a man with sharp features, wearing a suit she couldn't place in any of her recent memories. He looked ordinary enough, but something about him, the calm, almost calculating expression, sent an uneasy chill down her spine. She could feel the weight of it in the air, heavy and suffocating. I don't understand," Taylor murmured, looking up at Agent Davis. "Who is this guy? And why me? I'm a singer, not an agent. I'm not trained for this." Agent Davis's face remained impassive, her eyes cold as she adjusted her stance. "You'll learn quickly. This man is linked to a dangerous underground network. We've been tracking him for months. Your public persona makes you the perfect person to infiltrate. You'll meet him, get close, and gather information." Taylor stared at the agent, her mind still whirling. This couldn't be happening. It was too absurd. But the look in Agent Davis's eyes was unyielding, and the coldness of the situation, the weight of the sealed folder in her hands, made it all feel too real to dismiss, as a bad joke. Wait, so what do I do now? Taylor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Agent Davis nodded toward the door. You need to start preparing. Your first meeting with him is tomorrow. We'll give you more details then. What if I don't want to do this? What if I just quit? Davis's eyes flickered, her lips twitching ever so slightly as though the suggestion amused her. You don't get to quit. You're already involved. You've been compromised. Leaving now would put everyone at risk. There it was again, the unspoken truth that there was no way out, no easy exit from this nightmare. A tight knot formed in Taylor's chest as she processed the gravity of her situation. She was in too deep now. But how deep? What was the real plan? And what role was she meant to play? With a sigh, she walked toward the window, peering out at the blurred city lights below. She wasn't sure if she felt more like a pawn or a player in this twisted game. Her whole life had been one of control, of crafting her image, of setting the terms of her fame. This was different. This was real, and for the first time in years, she had no idea what was going to happen next. Agent Davis followed her, unfazed. You'll have training sessions. We'll teach you what you need to know, how to communicate securely, how to blend into this world. But it's a steep learning curve. You need to stay sharp. Taylor nodded, trying to steady herself. Okay, so, who else is involved in this? Anyone I can trust? Davis's gaze flickered to the side, her lips tightening. There's no one you can trust right now. Not unless they're part of the mission. Not unless they're cleared by us. Taylor exhaled, feeling her stomach twist. She wanted to scream, to throw something. She was Taylor Swift, for God's sake. A spy? It was madness. But then she remembered the photograph. The man in the suit. Whoever he was, he had to be important. Taylor's eyes narrowed. She wasn't going to just go along with this blindly. She needed answers. She needed to understand what was happening and why her. I need to know more about him, she said, turning to face Davis with a newfound determination. I need to understand why you chose me. Davis took a moment, her eyes scanning Taylor's face. I'll send you some information. But this is bigger than you think. This man is connected to an international syndicate. He's dangerous. We need you close to him, but we need you focused. Taylor's mind spun faster. Dangerous syndicate? What was she even getting into? A part of her, her natural curiosity and instinct to investigate, began to push back against the fear creeping in. She wanted to know the truth. She had to. As the night stretched on, Taylor found herself sitting across from Agent Davis in the penthouse living room, the agent's cold presence making the space feel even more suffocating. Taylor's thoughts were a tangled mess of fear, suspicion, and anger. But there was something else, too. Something she hadn't expected. A spark of excitement. For the first time in what felt like years, the world had become unpredictable. Her life wasn't just about stadiums, rehearsals, and fan interactions. She was on the edge of something dangerous, something that had the potential to unravel everything she thought she knew about herself. She wasn't sure if she was ready for it, but deep down, she knew she didn't have a choice. As Davis prepared to leave, she stopped by the door, casting one final glance at Taylor. Get some rest. Tomorrow, you start your mission. Taylor stood still, her gaze drifting to the photograph again, her fingers brushing the edges of the paper as she looked back at the cold, distant woman who was now her reluctant guide into this chaotic world. As the door clicked shut behind her, Taylor sank into the couch, her mind racing. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. Tomorrow would be her first step into a world she didn't understand, and there were too many unknowns. But one thing was certain, she wasn't going down without a fight. The morning after the encounter with Agent Davis, Taylor woke to an unfamiliar sense of unease. The sheets tangled around her legs felt heavier than usual, and the weight in her chest hadn't lifted. Her phone sat on the nightstand, now buzzing relentlessly with messages from her management team, fans, and friends, but none of them could erase the shadow that loomed over her. This was no longer just a matter of balancing fame and privacy. She was in too deep. As Taylor got ready for the day, the reality of the mission began to settle in. She couldn't escape the nagging feeling that she was being watched, every movement scrutinized by people she didn't understand. The world outside her penthouse felt like a distant memory. What was once a comforting routine now felt like a trap. Agent Davis had briefed her on the first step of the mission, a covert meeting with the man in the photo, a financier named Viktor Krulov, known for his ties to illegal arms trades, smuggling rings, and black market dealings. A man who could make or break the mission. A man who now saw her as an asset, just like the FBI did. Taylor's mind swirled with questions. Why me? What was it about me that made me the perfect person for this job? But there wasn't time to dwell on it. Agent Davis's instructions were clear. She had to move fast. She couldn't afford to make mistakes. The meeting was set for a lavish charity event at a high-profile Manhattan gallery, a place full of industry elites, politicians, and shady billionaires all rubbing elbows behind the glitzy facade of philanthropy. Taylor's job was simple: blend in, get close to Krulov, and gather information. But even as she slipped into the sparkling gown that had been prepared for her, a sense of dread gnawed at her gut. Her phone buzzed again. She didn't recognize the number, but the message was unmistakable. You are being followed. Trust no one. Her hands shook as she read the message, the words sending a wave of paranoia over her. Someone was watching her. Was it the FBI? Or was it Krulov's people? A chill ran down her spine as she felt the weight of the message press against her chest. She couldn't breathe. When she arrived at the gallery, the lavish crowd surrounded her, laughing and networking, unaware that just beneath the polished surface of this glamorous event, a dangerous game was unfolding. Taylor's eyes scanned the room, her heartbeat quickening with each second. The thrill of performing in front of a crowd was no longer enough to calm her nerves. Tonight, she was not an artist. She was an agent, a pawn in a game she barely understood. A voice pulled her from her thoughts. Miss Swift. She turned, her heart leaping into her throat. There he was, Victor Krulov. He was exactly as he appeared in the photograph, tall, with dark eyes that seemed to calculate every move she made, dressed in a tailored suit that screamed wealth and power. Victor Krulov, Taylor said, forcing a smile and extending her hand. It's an honor to meet you. He smiled, a thin, sharp expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. The pleasure is mine. I've heard a lot about you, Miss Swift. His voice was smooth, but there was something cold in it, something that sent another wave of unease through her. So, what brings you to this event? She asked, trying to play the part. I'm here for business, he replied, his gaze lingering on her with a calculating intensity. But business is best conducted with interesting company. Taylor nodded, her mind racing. Was this part of the plan? Was he testing her already? Before she could respond, a soft tap on her shoulder made her turn. Agent Davis was standing there, her presence as cold as ever. She'd slipped in unnoticed, her eyes sharp as she scanned the room. We need to talk, Davis said curtly, looking between Taylor and Krulov. The sudden interruption startled both of them, but Davis's demeanor was a clear signal that something was amiss. Taylor's instincts screamed at her that something wasn't right. Krulov's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes flickered briefly with something she couldn't place. Was it suspicion? Or something worse? Excuse me, Taylor said, her voice steady despite the rising panic. She followed Davis through a small side hallway, away from the party, into a quieter part of the gallery. What's going on? Taylor demanded, her voice tight. What's happening? Agent Davis took a deep breath, her face tight with frustration. This is not just a simple mission, Miss Swift. There are elements within the FBI that aren't as clean as they appear. People have been leaking information about the mission. You're not the only one who's been targeted. There are other players involved, people you can't trust. I don't know who's behind it all yet, but someone is trying to use you. The revelation hit Taylor like a punch to the gut. Leaking information? Had someone been feeding Krulov's network details about her? Who in the FBI could be behind this? Was Davis really trustworthy, or was she playing her own game? As the realization began to sink in, the air seemed to grow thicker, more oppressive. Taylor turned back toward the party, where Krulov was still mingling with his entourage, his gaze momentarily flicking back to her. The truth was becoming more elusive, and she had no idea who to trust. You need to stay close to Krulov, Davis urged in a low voice, but Taylor could see the tension in her eyes. The cracks in the agent's controlled demeanor were becoming more visible. He's dangerous, but if we're going to get to the bottom of this, you need to keep him close. Taylor nodded slowly, but her mind raced with doubt. Could she still trust Agent Davis? Was she just another pawn in this game? Before she could ask any more questions, the sound of distant gunshots echoed from the front of the gallery. Everything froze. The music cut off, people screamed, and chaos erupted. Taylor's heart pounded as the situation escalated into total pandemonium. She grabbed Agent Davis's arm, fear surging through her. "What's happening? We need to go? Now," Davis said, her voice cold and urgent. As they rushed toward the back exit, the weight of the moment settled over Taylor. The mission had just gone from dangerous to deadly, and she was more lost than ever in a maze of lies, shifting alliances, and deadly secrets. But there was no turning back now. The deeper she went, the more she realized. She wasn't just caught in the web, she was its center. The gunshots echoed like a heartbeat in the chaos of the gallery. Taylor's pulse thudded in her ears as she and Agent Davis weaved through the panicking crowd, the air thick with tension and confusion. People screamed, some ducked under tables, others scrambled for the exits. Security guards rushed past, shouting orders, but no one seemed to have a clear idea of what was happening. Taylor's breath came in shallow bursts. Her mind raced, her heart thumping as the chaos outside the gallery seemed to mirror the turmoil inside her head. What just happened? One moment, everything had been under control, and now, in the blink of an eye, the mission had gone completely off the rails. "Move," Davis hissed, pulling Taylor through a back hallway toward the service exit, her grip firm and unyielding. Taylor stumbled, but kept pace, her brain struggling to process everything. The gunshots had come from the front of the gallery. Someone had attacked. But who? And why? "We need to get out of here," Davis muttered, her eyes darting nervously toward the door. "It's a diversion. Someone wants us to fail. What the hell is going on?" Taylor demanded, trying to shake off the overwhelming fear that had gripped her chest. "First the leak, now this? Who's after us?" But Davis didn't answer. Instead, she quickened her pace, pulling Taylor through the darkened hallway. Taylor couldn't help but notice the tension in the agent's every movement, the way her hand kept brushing her gun, the sharpness in her eyes. Was she in danger too? Or was it something more? The door to the alley outside was just ahead. They were so close. Taylor's heart hammered, and her instincts screamed that every second mattered. "Stay low," Davis barked. She swung open the door, and they stepped into the alley, the noise of the party muffled behind them. The rain had picked up, falling in a heavy, steady downpour that seemed to add to the gloom of the moment. But as Taylor stepped out into the street, something stopped her. The feeling that had been growing in the pit of her stomach, the feeling that something was wrong, suddenly intensified. A sharp rustling sound caught her attention. Her eyes flicked to the shadows ahead, her senses going on high alert. From the darkness, two figures emerged. One was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a black trench coat. The other, though smaller, moved with the kind of agility Taylor recognized immediately, a trained operative. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. These weren't random attackers. They were waiting for us. Taylor's breath caught in her throat as she realized the horrifying truth. The leak, the gunshots, it had all been a trap, a carefully orchestrated plan to take them down. Davis didn't hesitate. She pushed Taylor roughly behind her, pulling out her weapon with quick precision. "Stay back," she shouted. The figures didn't move. Instead, one of them, the taller man, spoke with a cold, calculated voice that sent a chill down Taylor's spine. "You shouldn't have come, Agent Davis. And you definitely shouldn't have brought her into this." Davis tensed, her eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" The man's lips curled into a smirk. "We've been keeping an eye on you, Miss Swift, and on your new friend here. The FBI's little toy. The one who thought she could play spy." Taylor's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? What's going on?" The man stepped closer, his gaze flicking between Taylor and Davis with a predatory intensity. "The real question is, how long were you going to keep up the act? You think the FBI's your ally? Think again. We've been watching you both. You're nothing more than pawns in a much bigger game. And we have all the pieces." Davis's expression tightened. "You're working with Krulov, aren't you?" The man's smirk deepened. "Krulov is only one part of the network. You really think you can infiltrate that world and not get caught in the crossfire? There's nowhere to hide. Now, we're going to finish this." Taylor felt the floor drop out beneath her. Every word this man spoke made it clear that she was in over her head, far over her head. The game wasn't just between her and Krulov. It was bigger, darker, and far more dangerous. There were people in the FBI, in the shadows, pulling the strings. The figure in the trench coat raised his hand, signaling the other operative to move. Taylor's stomach twisted. She wasn't trained for this kind of confrontation. She wasn't prepared for this. Before she could react, Davis stepped forward, firing a shot into the air. "Get down," she shouted, shoving Taylor into a nearby doorway. The alley exploded into motion. Gunfire echoed off the walls as Davis and the two attackers exchanged shots. Taylor's heart raced in her chest as she pressed herself flat against the cold brick, her mind scrambling for a way out. She couldn't stay in the alley. She had to make a move. But the sound of sirens growing closer stopped her. More police. More chaos. This was escalating too quickly. Through the chaos, a cold, jarring thought came to her. What if Davis was lying? What if she was part of this game too? She couldn't trust anyone now, not even the woman who was supposed to be her ally. The man in the trench coat spoke again, his voice carrying over the commotion. "You don't get it, do you? There are people above Krulov, far above. If you think you're saving the world by playing your little role, you're wrong." Davis's face was set in grim determination as she continued to fire, trying to hold them off. But Taylor felt the truth closing in. This isn't about just Krulov. This isn't just about the FBI. This is something bigger, something dangerous. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the sounds of the gunfight grew fainter. The attackers disappeared into the shadows, melting into the night, leaving nothing behind but the echo of sirens and the bitter taste of betrayal. Davis lowered her weapon, her face taut with exhaustion and fear. "We need to move. Now." But Taylor wasn't sure she could follow anymore. The mission had turned into a blur of lies, danger, and shattered trust. And in the distance, as the sirens drew nearer, she realized one terrifying truth. She wasn't just caught in a game. She was its target. And with every step forward, the stakes got higher. The rain had finally let up, but the heavy weight of the night pressed down on Taylor. Her mind churned with a mix of dread and determination. She had no choice now. There was no going back. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place, but they revealed a terrifying picture. As much as she hated to admit it, the truth was clear. The FBI had betrayed her. Agent Davis wasn't just some by-the-book operative. She was part of a much darker, far-reaching network, one that had used Taylor from the beginning, exploiting her fame and innocence to gain access to people and places they could never reach on their own. And Krulov? He was a small piece of a much larger, international syndicate, one that had been pulling strings behind the scenes, manipulating everything from the very start. Taylor had learned enough to know this wasn't just about her anymore. This wasn't about being a spy. This was about survival. She and Davis were holed up in a safe house, the flickering lights casting long shadows on the cold concrete walls. Taylor paced the room, every step heavier than the last. She had no idea who she could trust anymore, no idea if her own instincts were even enough to guide her through the maze of deception that had been laid out in front of her. The mission, once shrouded in mystery, had now grown into something personal. Davis had finally come clean. There was an underground faction within the FBI working with Krulov Syndicate. They'd infiltrated the highest levels, manipulating governments, law enforcement, and organizations across the world. Taylor's involvement wasn't random. She was the key to a much larger operation, one that would give them ultimate control over international trade, influence, and power. But the deeper Taylor went, the more twisted the reality became. She now knew she wasn't just a pawn in their game. She was a target. The same faction that had used her had turned on her, and now she was the one they needed to eliminate. "We're running out of time," Davis said, her voice sharp, her eyes scanning the documents strewn across the table. "Krulov is meeting with the other players tomorrow. We need to stop them, or they'll have complete control." Taylor turned sharply to face her. "And you think I'm just going to waltz in there with you, like I've been doing this whole time? I don't trust you anymore, Davis." Davis met her gaze, unwavering. There was a flicker of something, regret, maybe, or guilt, but it was fleeting. "You don't have to trust me," she said. "You just have to trust the mission. If we don't act now, it's all over. They'll kill us, Taylor, and they'll keep on killing anyone who stands in their way. You're the only one who can stop this." The weight of her words hung heavily in the air. Taylor could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but it wasn't fear. It was the rush of clarity, of realization. She had to make a choice. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about control. Control over her own fate. Control over the truth. But the decision was anything but easy. Taylor's thoughts raced back to the night of the gala. The gunshots, the figures in the alley, the feeling of being hunted, of being used. She had been living in a world of illusions, caught between the strings of a web so tangled she couldn't see the end. But now, at the edge of everything, the only thing that mattered was whether or not she could cut the strings. "We have one shot," Davis continued, pushing a map across the table. "Tomorrow night, they'll meet in a secure location, underground, heavily guarded. We have the intel, but we need someone inside, someone they'll never suspect." Taylor stared at the map. It was a location she knew all too well, a remote estate in the Hudson Valley, hidden deep in the woods. It was a place she had visited years ago, part of a gala she'd performed at. A place that, now, felt like a trap. A part of her wanted to walk away, to shut everything down and disappear. She could fake an injury, blame the FBI's lack of security, and leave it all behind. But something inside her pushed against that urge. She wasn't just a singer anymore. She wasn't just an agent. She was a woman standing on the edge of something far bigger, and this was her chance to rewrite the narrative. She turned back to Davis. "We do it tomorrow," Taylor said, her voice steady but tinged with a quiet fire. "But you're not leading this mission." "I am." Davis opened her mouth to protest, but Taylor silenced her with a look. "I'm the one they trust. I'm the one they'll let in." There was a moment of silence. Taylor could see the hesitation in Davis's eyes. Doubt, maybe, but she didn't care. She had no choice but to move forward. They were in this together, but the power, the choices, the consequences, they would fall on her shoulders alone. The next 24 hours felt like an eternity. Taylor's every instinct screamed at her to back out, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized that backing out wasn't an option. The FBI, Krulov, this underground faction, they were all counting on her to fail. And if she failed, they would win. They would take control, and nothing would stop them. But if she succeeded, if she could pull this off, she would not only save herself, but expose the corrupt heart of the organization she'd once trusted. She could be the one to tear it all down. The final confrontation would happen at dawn. Taylor took a deep breath, pulling her coat tighter around her shoulders. The streets were quiet, the city at rest, but she knew that once she stepped into that mansion, into the heart of their operation, there would be no turning back. In the final moments before the storm, she allowed herself a brief glance in the mirror. She barely recognized the person staring back at her. She was no longer just the pop star everyone knew. She was something more, something dangerous. With one last, resolute look toward the door, she turned to Davis, her eyes steely. "Let's finish this." And with that, the final chapter began. But as they stepped into the unknown, Taylor's heart burned with a question she couldn't shake. Would the truth set her free, or would it be the end of everything she'd fought for? The stakes had never been higher. The final showdown was just ahead. And only one thing was certain. Someone would not be leaving that mansion alive. The mansion loomed ahead like a dark fortress, nestled deep in the woods just beyond the city's edge. The air was thick with the tension of the coming confrontation, a sense of finality pressing in on Taylor with every step. The moment had arrived. There would be no more hiding, no more second chances. Taylor's breath hitched as she adjusted her collar, the cold wind biting at her skin. She could feel the weight of the gun holstered at her side, the thin fabric of her black tactical suit a stark contrast to the glamorous dresses she used to wear on stage. This was no longer a mission she had been forced into. It was her mission now. The stakes were higher than they had ever been, and it wasn't just about her survival anymore. It was about dismantling the shadowy empire that had used her as a pawn. Agent Davis was beside her, tense but resolute. She glanced at Taylor one last time before leading the way toward the mansion's main entrance. Their silence spoke volumes. There was no need for words. Neither of them could afford to make a mistake tonight. As they approached the imposing front doors, the lights inside flickered, and a chill ran down Taylor's spine. She knew Krulov would be waiting for them inside, but there were other players here. People from the deepest corners of the FBI's dark underbelly, people whose names no one dared speak aloud. Tonight, everything would be exposed. They entered through a side door, taking advantage of the guards' distracted attention to slip past unnoticed. Inside, the mansion was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint hum of distant conversations echoing through the hallways. "You'll find Krulov in the East Wing," Davis whispered, her voice tight. "That's where the final meeting is supposed to take place. Get the intel, and we'll be out before they even know we were here." Taylor nodded, but something in the back of her mind tugged at her. It was too simple, too clean. There was no such thing as a clean operation anymore. Not with this mission. Not with what she'd learned about the men and women behind the scenes. They moved swiftly through the mansion, taking careful steps to avoid the roving patrols. Taylor's heart raced, but there was no turning back now. They reached the entrance to the east wing, the doors massive and imposing. As Davis pushed the door open, Taylor caught her breath. The room beyond was a grand conference hall, lit by low chandeliers that cast long, flickering shadows. At the far end of the room, sitting at a large, polished table, was Viktor Krulov, flanked by several other individuals whose faces were obscured in the dim light. But it wasn't just the criminals that filled her with dread. Standing in the corner of the room was someone she didn't expect to see. Agent Davis's superior, Director Klein. Her blood went cold. Klein's gaze locked with hers the moment she entered. "You should have stayed out of this, Taylor," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "But you've made your choice." Taylor's mind raced as the realization hit. Director Klein. He was the one pulling the strings. He was the mastermind behind the entire operation. Every part of this conspiracy had led back to him. The leaks, the lies, the manipulation, it had all been him, using her as a means to an end. "I didn't make a choice," Taylor replied, her voice calm but hard. "You did. You decided to play me." Davis stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "Taylor, you need to get the intel. We can still stop them." But Taylor shook her head. "No. This ends now." Krulov leaned forward, his eyes cold as he spoke. "You don't understand, Miss Swift. There's no way out of this. You've been part of the game from the start. You think you can just walk away?" Taylor's heart pounded in her chest, but there was a flicker of defiance in her. She knew what she had to do. This wasn't just about taking down Krulov or Klein. It was about taking back control of her own story. "You're wrong," she said, stepping closer to the table. "I choose to end this." Without warning, she drew the weapon from her side and aimed it squarely at Klein. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Everyone seemed to hold their breath as she took a step forward. Klein raised his hands in mock surrender. "Do you really think this changes anything? You're nothing more than a puppet." "You're wrong about that, too," she said, her voice steady. "This ends now." Her finger hovered over the trigger, but just as the standoff reached its boiling point, Davis lunged forward, knocking the gun from her hand and spinning her to face her. "Stop!" Davis shouted, her eyes wild. "This isn't the way. You don't understand what's at stake." Taylor struggled to regain her footing, her mind racing. "What do you mean?" "He's the one pulling the strings. He's the reason we're all here." "Not entirely," Davis said, her voice strained. "There's more. Klein's not the only one who has a stake in this. We're all part of a bigger plan. The people you're up against, they want to see you fail. They want you to die because you're the one who can stop them." Taylor felt her stomach drop. "What are you saying? Who else is involved?" But before Davis could answer, Klein's voice cut through the tension. "You really don't get it, do you? The moment you walked into this world, you became part of it. You can't escape it. None of us can." The room exploded into chaos. As Klein stood, the sound of gunfire rang out, sharp, deafening, as the door slammed open and masked agents flooded in. Taylor ducked behind the nearest pillar as shots whizzed past, the room disintegrating into madness. In the heat of the gunfire, everything seemed to slow. She caught a glimpse of Davis, her figure silhouetted against the chaos, locking eyes with Taylor. There was no time left. It was now or never. Taylor made her decision. She bolted toward the security panel at the back of the room. Her fingers fumbled as she punched in the override code she had memorized earlier, hacking into the mansion's security system. The wall seemed to close in, but she didn't hesitate. As the countdown to release the mansion's lockdown timer began, she hit the button. The mansion's doors slammed open with a screech. The last moments of the battle were chaotic, masked agents scrambling to escape, Klein shouting orders, and the distant hum of sirens growing louder. Taylor barely had time to think before she was rushing toward the exit, Davis behind her, a brief but knowing look between them. They had won this round, but there was still so much to undo. As the night air hit her face, Taylor could barely breathe. She had just taken down an empire, but it had cost her everything. In the aftermath, the FBI was in tatters. Klein and his network were arrested, and the truth came out. The leaks, the betrayals, and the manipulation were all exposed, leading to a public outcry. But as Taylor looked back on the ruins of her former life, she realized that what she had lost wasn't just fame or innocence, it was trust. She had survived, but not unscathed. She had been forced to become something she never wanted to be, but in doing so, she had found her strength. The woman who once stood on stage and sang for millions had learned how to fight for herself and for the truth. As she walked away from the wreckage of the past, she knew one thing for certain. Her story was far from over. But now it was hers to tell.